morning. First of all, thanks for joining us. I would like to point out a few things. If we started trying to talk about everything that's cool and going on in healthcare, we could spend the rest of this conference. So we're going to try to limit the topics. Plus, we're trying to crowd a lot of stuff in a very small space, so we're going to try to use maybe a 3 or 4 minute response time so we can get through as much detail as we can. And all of these gentlemen, these are really significant thought leaders across the country through various multiple systems. They're available. If you've got lingering questions that are going to take a while longer, just tackle one of them after the session and they'll be happy to chat with you. In terms of questions, we're okay with questions that are short during, but if not, we're going to try to wrap up with about 10, 15 minutes left, so there's plenty of time to ask questions after. So both ways work. So let's jump in. Mitch, how you been, man?
Doing well.
So Mitch has spent 27 years in the Navy. His final position was captain, and he was Civil Engineering Corps Director of the Naval Facilities Engineering Command, NAVFAC, Smart Energy Integration. So I'd like to get to that later. But first of all, I'd like to get your observations. Last 11 years, Mitch has worked with Kaiser Permanente and now Thomas Jefferson Health University System. I'd like to get your perspective on a few things. First of all, I've learned, like you and many of your contemporaries, feel like you're somewhat overbuilt in your bed capacities and your space. And I'd like to understand if you could tell us a little bit about your strategies to resolve that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. If you remember the movie 12 O'Clock High, and you got Gregory Peck flying these missions, and there's just all kinds of bogeys out there, and they're just frantically trying to knock these things out of the sky. So that's what it feels like in healthcare sometimes, particularly where we are at Thomas Jefferson. And you may be able to relate to some of these. You know, we've merged 7 or 8 systems over the past 7, 8 years. So we've got we went from about 1.5 million square feet to about 18 million square feet, 18 hospitals, 18 million square feet across the Philadelphia metro area. And oh, by the way, you know, to complicate it, right after we completed the last merger, you know, our CEO decided to retire. So we're in this place where we're working to bring structure and what I'd say is sort of a sound operating plan to that platform. Key in our strategy is the rationalization and realignment of real estate. And so it's really this confluence of these individual systems that initially, you know, were each run by their CEO, and the CEO could go out and sort of by decree say, hey, I want a tower here. Donors, go find some donors, give us some money, we're going to build that tower. And then we'll figure out the program later. Now we're an 18 hospital system. We're essentially an enterprise, a corporate enterprise. So the mind shift has to occur to all right, if I decide to spend $100 million, is that the best $100 million investment for that enterprise? And so I think, you know, the struggle is how to do that amidst just a lot of other emerging issues. Deferred maintenance backlogs off the charts, $1 billion plus. The need to modernize. You know, so in our system, most of the hospitals are 35, 40 years of age. So modernization has to be in that equation too. And oh, by the way, growth and expansion. So hopefully, Mark, that kind of tees up just a little bit of what we've been, you know, sort of working through. And maybe we'll talk about a couple of solutions later. But I think to your point, that's a beer discussion over many, many days.
Yeah, it's a lot of background noise with all the M&A stuff, certainly. Mike, I want to tell you, I learned some interesting things about you as I did some background for this panel. One is that you're a member of the Northern Illinois University wrestling team. And
long time ago.
Yeah. And he's a consultant to the Joint Commission. So my question is, has that wrestling experience helped?
Well, fortunately, I was on the consulting side of the Joint Commission, not the survey side. So people welcomed us in. We weren't. We were the good guys. But obviously, yeah, being a Division I athlete, I think helps prepare you for the rigors of working in the healthcare industry as a whole.
I understand. I think they're worth wrestling anyway. As your Senior AVP of Facilities for the University of Rochester Medicine, I understand you developed some very interesting perspectives as well as for adaptive reuse. And I'd like you to tell us a little more about one of those projects, particularly in a building icon, Sears. So tell us more about that project, how you accomplished it, what was your intent, and how did you push that upstairs?
So it's currently in progress. So we're doing a large ambulatory orthopedic center in a Sears building that was at a regional mall. So we've taken it over, we started to do the work on it. It's been a challenge, it's a large project. We're at 390,000 square feet in there. So lots of different, it's an ambulatory surgery center as well as large physical therapy space and clinics. It was a challenging project from a couple regards. I think one of the first issues was convincing the board that this was a good location and somewhere we wanted to do a project. I think there's a lot of attributes that are obviously good for a mall in terms of access, parking, some of the things we always look for. I think one of the hardest challenges, though, was figuring out a valuation. What is that building and land worth? We had some members on the board who don't think it's worth anything because, look, it's going out of business, they're hurting, we should be able to get it for pennies on the dollar. And then you've got the mall owner who realizes they're sitting on a prime piece of land who wants it, and literally the range was from $20 a square foot to $200 a square foot. And we had to try to close the gap, and there's not a lot of comps out there to figure out what the value is, so we worked through that. I think one of the easiest ways was we're building a new section there too. And we were able to take really quickly and look at the number. What does it cost us per square foot to build the new? And what does it cost us to renovate? And there was about a $200 a square foot difference. So it was easy to say, look, anything under 200 is a good deal for us. So we ended up coming in at about $75 a square foot, which I think, wound up really convincing the board this was a good play, and we've continued to expand. The second problem, and I think, we'll know more as we fully open, most of it is on one level. So when you start looking at 300 of the 390,000 square feet on one level, the travel distances get quite large between areas. Until you start walking it, you don't realize how big of a space that is. So those are two of the areas we're working on.
Cool. Thank you. Jonathan, thanks for participating in the panel today. I've learned some interesting things about you as well. After your BFA at the University of Michigan, you attended the Cleveland Institute of Music, or before, excuse me, in vocal performance. So, do you want to sing us something, or do you get to sing at the Christmas party?
Well, it's 8:10 in the morning. I won't force these people to
Not enough
listen to something I haven't done for about 35 years. So.
Well, that's awesome. Northwell is a juggernaut in the New York State. So, tell us a little about the ways you're looking at project delivery in light of the challenges with materials, supplies, labor, everything that goes on in the New York City model. So.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, and I think most of the country's perspective, the biggest challenge we're seeing right now is in material and supply chain issues across the country, and trying to find more creative ways to address that, and a lot of it is actually pulling it away from contractors, trying to bring it more in-house. As Mitch was talking about with trying to get your arms around portfolio management, we at Northwell have always had a challenge with that. We're a 23 hospital system, about 850 ambulatory facilities across the greater New York area, and as we keep kind of plugging on facilities from different directions, trying to keep up with that and knowing what we have, and knowing how we can leverage that when we look at supply chain, when we look at negotiating with some of the larger scale vendors, and when we start getting those phone calls when you're trying to get a generator from one of your hospitals and they're telling you it's a 72-week lead time, and you're like, no, that's completely unacceptable. And you then go back and look at your portfolio and you call procurement and you say, all right, I want 5 generators. Let's go back and negotiate and see what that can do to bring us up in line. And really trying to push the concept of pre-purchase internal with our procurement group versus going through the general contractor on some of these projects. and then we end up just handing the equipment off to them. But if we can leverage our greater portfolio to be able to say, as we look at not only new projects, but look at some of that deferred maintenance that you were talking about that we need to catch up on, can we start the process of saying, all right, next year, we know we're going to do 5 air handler replacements at this hospital, 7 at this hospital, and we know that here's the basics of it, and start working with manufacturers to get on the line now so that we know, look, I'm going to want that in February, I'm going to want this in April, I'm going to want that in June. How do we set it up now? And we're 50% down this year, 50% next year on delivery, but get in that line now so that we can really be ahead of the game versus trying to catch up like we are with everything else. I think that's really what, it's kind of been our drive lately.
Cool. So Travis, on the end down there, your role as Senior Vice President, Real Estate Facilities at Common Spirit, well, that's one of the largest systems in our country. I just want to thank you for your time. I know these are hard things to pull away from. You obtained your MBA from the prestigious Thunderbird School of Global Management, so I'm kind of jealous about that. And you selected your concentration in global challenges. So with all the challenges we're enduring, what's your solution for world peace?
We'll have to put that one on the back burner.
Okay. Can you share how Common Spirit is addressing this issue of lack of flexibility in your portfolio?
Well, I think I'm a little surprised to hear my colleagues talk about all the challenges they're facing because, I think we've got our deferred maintenance under control and we have 100% occupancy across our portfolio and really no issues there. So
Congrats.
I'm happy to share. I would say our significant challenge is the fact that 2 large health systems, 2 different operating models coming together, and I think as Mitch touched on, those different operating philosophies yielded different outcomes in terms of where we place things, how we acquired, how we integrated. Unfortunately, both of those have yielded the same thing, which is space in the wrong spot, medical office space that's not occupied properly, gaps in our delivery model, overbedded locations and underbedded certain marketplaces, lack of continuum of care, lack of a complete continuum of care. And so all of those things I think compress upon how you make decisions. You take that and you spread that across 26 states and the decisions become very, very daunting. Where are you going to spend that dollar because that dollar is needed in 10 or 12 or 13 other places effectively. So for us, it's adding rigor to the capital planning process. Mm-hmm. It's adding rigor to the decision-making process around business planning, which is something I think a lot of Catholic health systems or a lot of not-for-profit health systems have struggled to do. We're going to adopt operating models and operating philosophies around business planning that recognize that you don't have the ability to serve your communities if you don't ultimately produce as a baseline business. So.
Awesome. Mitch, I want to get back to you for a second. We've talked a lot, and we hear a lot about what's going on in the marketplace right now with the construction challenges, cost increases, inflation across the entire construction delivery model. And so what I'm interested in hearing about is how you plan on dealing with that with all this background M&A noise that's going on in your world.
Yeah, I think just to kind of leverage off of Travis's last comment, the mantra that we've been pushing at Jefferson is plan the work, work the plan, right? So, and the CFO hates when I say this, but real estate moves at glacial speed. Mm-hmm. So if you've got somewhat of a decent plan out there, you can begin to put things in place, measures in place that help you hedge. there's not a whole lot of hedge we can do against what's happening right now, particularly for new projects, for our specialty care pavilion. And we didn't know that COVID was coming. It just made sense to me that, hey, look, we know this project's coming. Structural steel seems like it's on this trend going up. So, we convinced the board, even before we signed the final GMP, to allow the developer to go ahead and purchase the steel and the glass. It just seemed like the right thing to do as we were looking at the micro trends. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden that steel that we bought at $3,000 a metric ton is somewhere around $6,000. That would have blown the business case out of the water. So I think part of the way that we prep is not only are we real estate and facilities professionals, but we have to be closet economists. We have to sort of begin to sort of look at where are the trends headed and where do we hedge. So it was really cool to go to the board, and the board's like, wow, fuel prices are going crazy, and so what did that do to your bottom line in operating? Nothing. We're still tracking for about $2 million savings here because we hedged 3 to 4 years ago in our utilities pricing. And so that's an added sophistication that we have to have. But going back to the plan, the work the plan, you have to have solid strategies in place, solid plans to achieve those strategies, good governance, the ability to get decisions very quickly. And just as we look at particularly nonprofit healthcare systems, they've not developed a lot of that governance and that structure. And so I think that's where we can help them on the facility side. And I think for us, also sort of opening them up to opportunities they have on the clinical operations side, which is where that's where the bread is really buttered. That's a business acumen that we can help bring to the table and potentially hedge against future escalation. I think right now, to end on this note, our issue is we're looking at 15 to 16% escalation. We're just trying to sort of hold off on some spend so that we can get back to 6 to 8%, which is still crazy, right? Because we're used to 3%. But sort of getting our folks able to realize that a good decision today beats a better decision tomorrow. As long as we know what we need to know and we've defined it right, we can get good pricing for them.
I think hedging has been something we've used in utilities for some time, and a lot of folks think you do it for the economy when it's in the downside. You actually want to do it just to mitigate risk, right?
You do. I mean, one of the things that CFOs like is cost certainty. So people are always saying, well, what if the prices go down? And that's not the issue. The issue is you're trying to hedge against prices going up and impacting your business case.
Agreed. Travis, I want to jump back to you for a second. A significant portion of your portfolio is on the West Coast, and you have some really stringent code compliance teams, OSHPD, those folks. Are they impacting your ability to think about adaptive reuse, or have you got a workaround for that?
Well, unfortunately, I think the California marketplace is more about this next wave of kind of investments in seismic for us. We are, as you noted, heavily represented. We have, if I had to spend everything that I needed to in order to achieve that objective in 2029, we'd spend about $3 billion just in upgrades to the existing facilities themselves. And I think as all of us know, you can't just spend money on the seismic upgrades because other aspects of those facilities just simply are not, they're not usable in the current sense, they're not usable in a future sense. So 3 billion becomes 6 very quickly, meaning that there's just certain things that don't fit in the portfolio. You have to choose how you're going to descale your portfolio in order to respond to your communities while making certain strategic investments. And those descalings allow us to do something very different in those marketplaces, allow us to do less of the seismic upgrades, less of the structural and physical upgrades that are necessary in order to keep it as an acute asset, but they ultimately then slot into the portfolio as an ambulatory or a less acute asset effectively. But those are difficult because that's changing the care that you're going to provide to a community. It's going to a neighborhood in San Francisco and saying to them, I'm sorry, we're no longer going to be a hospital in your community, but you're going to still have access to care. Those are the bigger issues. It's the emotional response, the decisions around how the portfolio looks and where we choose to spend money. Those are easy. It's a data-driven decision. You know, it makes sense to spend $1 billion here. It makes sense not to spend $1 billion here. And you know, unfortunately, I guess I never really appreciated that I reached a point in my career where my conversations start and end in billions, not in millions. But that's where we're at. It's a question of, do we spend $1 billion here, or do we spend $1 billion here?
Cool, thanks. Mike, I want to jump back to you. You've endorsed yourself into disruptive innovations, and I'm a huge fan. I think that, you know, we talk about, innovation, and we talk about it from a disruptive position. In my experience, most healthcare projects are just disruptive. You know, hopefully you end up with the innovation side, but they're just disruptive during the process. So my curious, your big box strategy was certainly disruptive. Can you tell us how you calmed that storm?
Well, I don't know that we've calmed it yet, but we're working through it. I think we have the same challenges that everybody has right now. It's labor, it's supply chain, cost escalation. I know there's a session, I think, tomorrow morning that's going to go into that in more detail, but I think we need to try to get upstream. And I think this event is a great opportunity because, as Jonathan pointed out, one of our challenges is supply chain. And being able to meet directly with suppliers and try to address some of these concerns and cut out the middleman in a lot of cases will help with that. I know we're a big fan of prefabrication. We're trying to use prefabrication wherever we can. One of the big advantages early on in prefabrication was accelerating your schedule. I could take an 80-week project down to 40 weeks by working in parallel off-site and on-site and bringing it together. Makes sense. But that doesn't do me any good today if I have a 70-week lead time on my air handler. That savings is absorbed and eaten back up by the inability to get the supplies that we need to open the facility. So I think working through both of those has been part of it. So one of the things that we focused on, in addition to when we're doing a big new emergency department expansion and bed tower, and it's a $600+ million project, and labor is going to be a challenge. We wanted to do prefab. We started to bid that out, and one of the challenges, all the prefab low bidders were out of market. So then I get pushback of how do I keep this local? So we've worked now with our trade unions as well as a couple of our local builders, and we're working on building a co-op and creating our own prefabrication system within the community that we could bring people in and multiple people use. So I think the more we could try to localize, the more we could try to get in front of the supply chain helps reduce some of that risk.
So you're still using a lot of prefabrication, though?
Well, absolutely. I think, prefabrication, labor is one of the big challenges, and getting a diverse labor force. When we look, especially when you're using union workforce, I would say our carpenters union, we have 2,000 carpenters local in our carpenters union, 20 are minorities. How am I supposed to hit any type of MBE goals when I'm starting with that? When we look at what are the historic reasons why, a big part of it is when if a student decides to get into the union, they decide they're going to want to be in the trades, from the time they sign up to the time they start, it's about 2 years. Well, they went and found a different career. They're not going to sit around and wait. With prefabrication, we're able to get them working at an apprenticeship level right away, and in the same workplace. If we're on a bus route, something, they don't have to worry about transportation. They get steady work. There's not the seasonal work. So there's a lot of advantages to that, too.
Yeah, that's a great integration strategy. I like that. And getting the young people engaged, we're devoid of skills and trades now, right? That's our probably biggest challenge. So but having an opportunity to put in an internship program and at the same time create that prefabrication savings opportunity, that's terrific. Jonathan, you got a great vision and perspective on creating flexibility in the healthcare environment. And I like your conversation about less is more, meaning less ambulation for the patients, less distance between care sites. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I think a lot of what we've been looking at in specifically Manhattan as of late has been, we have a very diverse and very broad group of ambulatory facilities around Manhattan. I mean, we're probably up to about 100 ambulatory facilities just on the island of Manhattan, and so it's very disparate where the patients have to go to receive their care. And so we're finally catching up, I will say, and looking more towards big box facilities, and how can we start pulling them all together to try to focus that patient's care. And and I think one of the things that I've been driving with the health system is trying to get away from that mentality of, here's the orthopedic center and here's the head and neck center, and how do we just create a big box facility that is physician office space, and how do we design that exam room that is flexible enough to be able to be utilized by any service line, and how do we create that space adjacent to it where they can, that's maybe a little bit specialized, that can can be a procedure space for cardiothoracic, or can be an X-ray room if it's going to be ortho. Looking more towards the flexibility of the space, and how can we create disease-specific clinics in an area where, so you now have a patient that comes that may need to see their ortho, may need to see neuro, may need to see a neurosurgeon, and we can bring them all to them in that one space and have an exam room that's large enough to be able to support whatever that diagnostic care needs to be. But also tomorrow, it can be a clinic for general surgery or cardiothoracic. And how do we create this flexible environment that allows the patient to come to that one spot with that care in the big box kind of world. So I mean, that's really a lot of what we've been driving towards, and utilizing that as part of our, keep going back to the terms of portfolio management, but how do we look to drive some of this older portfolio that we have back into kind of a singular location that can be managed in a more effective manner.
Yeah, I think a big stewardship issue is dealing with service lines and patient flow, right? If we can improve patient flow, we improve the amount of care we provide, we increase revenue. If we're going to be locked in on target values for deferred maintenance, capital renewal, more revenue, 6% or more is more. Ask any architect, right? Mm-hmm. So, creating that model where we can begin to have that conversation is awesome.
Mark, if I might, just one of the things that he was saying, I think it struck me a little bit as I was listening, and that is, I think there's a challenge that we have with our clinicians in that they believe everything that they do is so unique and specific to them. Yeah. Whether it's an operating room, whether it's a procedure space, or whether it's a clinic. The reality is it's an exam room. Right. And an orthopedic surgeon, a GI physician, an internal medicine doc, or a cardiologist can all use that space exactly as it's designed effectively. And convincing them that that is the case is one of the largest challenges I think we all have, which is to say the standardization, the modularization allows us to be effective in how we deploy assets and how we leave assets when they're no longer viable for us as a health system. That's why we have hangovers all over each one of these systems. I bet you they go to 10 clinics that aren't utilized in the way they should be or as effectively as they should be because they're simply built specific for Dr. Smith or Dr. Jones. That's got to go away. One advantage that we have as a system is that we have 6,600 employed physicians. So we've got more data than we know what to do with. But what that data tells us is there is one way to run a clinic. There's one structure that makes sense. And the data proves that that's the efficiency that is necessary in order to drop the portfolio to a size that's manageable. You know, for us, that goal is 1.5 exam rooms per doc. And it's designed in a certain way that allows us to move from clinician to clinician to clinician, regardless of how that's ultimately used. But if we don't get there, we're gonna kill ourselves. You talked about it in terms of dollars per square foot. We can't afford it in the same way that any of our corporate or other industries are. So.
Yeah, I think Travis brings up a great point. Data is so important, especially when you're trying to convince the doctors of something and showing them data. So we're doing a similar exercise right now. You know, for years they built out on the four exam rooms per doc. So every time they hired a new provider, they added 4 exam rooms. And nobody was looking at utilization and how many times we're turning a room. Now we're trying to drive to 8 turns a day. And we're looking at most of our exam rooms across our system are 4.6. So we just looked and said, we could add 2 million more patient visits a year without adding 1 more square foot of space if we just utilize and get up to the numbers we need to get to. But you're right, convincing the doctors and the other providers that they could all use the same space is sometimes a challenge. But the more we can integrate that and the more we have real data that we could show them, the better off we'll be.
And I think it's also not just a challenge of convincing the doctors, right? It's a challenge of convincing the administrators.
Right.
You know, when we looked at business planning and we looked at room utilization, you know, they're content planning for 60 to 65% utilization.
Yeah.
And I look at that and I'm like, this is highway robbery.
That's right.
I'm like, how is that okay? And so we ended up with this building we're talking about. We ended up doing modeling with the architect, with utilization modeling that actually, so we showed them a little video of here are the people walking through the building, see how easy it is, and to say, and we based this on 80% utilization, and they were amazed. They're like, how could that possibly be? We can't operate at more than 65% right now, but you show it to them, you show them the data, and then you show them the pretty pictures, and all of a sudden their minds change. It's pretty incredible how the power of that data could be.
Well, if you look at the data, I think in our industry, we've gotten caught into this, you know, we plan for a certain space. Utilization is one metric, productivity in that space is another. And so just because Dr. Smith's scheduled to be there from 8 to 5 that day doesn't mean he's productive in the time. And so, you know, the focus that we've had in a lot of our conversations has been, it is not the objective of real estate to make your physicians productive.
Yeah.
It's the responsibility of the physician enterprise that if Dr. Smith has 18 slots that day, he's got 18 patients. Because anytime he doesn't have a patient, that's a lost productivity. So our metrics are really that we're at about 50% productive for the utilized space. So if we're sitting at effectively 80% utilized, we're sitting at about a 40% productive space, which means we have 60% capacity across the system in all of our medical office buildings. So for me, I write checks to third parties to the tune of about $450 million a year. If I just take that metric alone, 60% of that is non-productive for the health system.
Yeah.
You know, just getting rid of it, redeploying it, or on the flip side, getting our enterprise to use the space in a productive manner changes the numbers dramatically for the health system.
Yeah, guys, my experience is that data is seldom used in design.
Yeah.
We talk about it, we've heard the terms evidence-based design and everything else. What happens generally, and it's historical, it's traditional, it's what we do. We see a need, we've got either a high-producing physician group or what it is, and then we put that into business. The next thing you know, we're out designing, and we put that into some mode. And what's interesting is, if you think about it, and I'd like to get your perspective, is it general or is it unusual that we would say, hey, what's your history been for throughput in your clinic? What's general patient community. And, you know, if we double the size of the clinic, what's it based on? What's that decision based on? Can y'all talk about that at all?
Yeah, we ran into that on the major project that we have. It was a 460,000 square foot building, and the docs and the nurses, and I'm not trying to be pejorative, they were doing this, that's their part-time job, really, that, you know, in an emerging system, came up with a 500,000 square foot program, so we're 40,000 square foot odd. And people were every building that I've ever built is always too expensive, right? But, you know, the real issue is does the business case still work? Well, the business case didn't work at 500,000 square feet, so what do you do? Two options: add more square footage or take away programs. I'm an industrial engineer, so I kind of came in and go, hey, you know, there's actually a third option. We can scrub the program, right? We can leverage your data, your throughput, standard industrial engineering practices that have been used in other industries to figure out if we have the right program. Well, that building went from 500,000 square foot program to 420,000 square foot program. We created 40,000 square feet of shell space just through efficiencies. Yep. and being real tight in the management. And oh, by the way, moving away from this concept of I own this space, because that's what's driving a lot of this behavior. This is my space, right? But you got to go to a shared concept. So I totally agree. Flexibility is king, right? And through the work week and even through the work day, there can be shifts in volumes that say, you know what, peds is right next to family and family health, and so let's share these exam rooms between the two, which means flexibility is king. So moving to a model, we just finished a design guide specification, which specifies exam rooms, all spaces. It's about 150 different spaces that we use across our thing. They're all spec'd. We're going to get leadership to buy off on that. And we have a concept where 85% of the modalities can be treated in one exam room. There's some one-offs, right? But that allows great flexibility. That allows us to build those flexible platforms across the market that can change with the demographics and the market shifts that occur. And so that mindset, that thinking, I think is very new to healthcare, at least from what I've seen in the 11 years that I've been here. And that is the move that needs to be made to move healthcare towards that same place that we were at in manufacturing, services industry, transportation. They've all used hyper efficiencies to drive down their costs. That's where we are in healthcare.
So Mitch, I guess the one question I would have is, did you spend time with them to discuss the impact to their business plan around FTEs? Because at the end of the day, you saved 40,000, so you saved an FTE, but how many FTEs did the clinic save in reduction? So I think that's the other aspect of this that I think a lot of our health systems and certainly our partners don't understand, and that is, compression of the footprint is a compression of their needs from a clinician, from an FTE, from a support, from our perspective, from an air conditioning and heating and cooling perspective. All of those things add up. It's not just 1 square foot, it's 1 square foot multiplied by 10 as it impacts the system.
So one of the things I would add too, in addition to looking at the clinical space that we're all obviously acutely aware of, it's the support space, especially when we're looking at multi-specialty clinics. I can tell you when we have a multi-specialty clinic, we may have 7 different groups that share a building. They're not integrated at all, and how do we force them to look at, can we have shared waiting spaces, shared conference rooms, shared, to your point, everybody it's my space, I own it. I'm not sharing my conference room. If I have education space in the academic, they're not sharing it. So how do we get more efficiency through shared spaces when we actually have a true integrated multi-specialty clinic, not just a bunch of clinics under the same roof?
Well, and that was part of the modeling that we did to help convince them, because we're stripping all that stuff away from them. So there's no registration, there's no check-in, no check-out on any of these clinical floors. It's all centralized on one floor. Every patient goes to one spot. does their check-in, it goes up, and everyone's like, how can I let go of that? That's my copay. My copay. I need that $10. But no, it's ours. It's one building, but it showed they didn't believe we could do it. That now patients are going to be waiting for an hour to get into the building, and so again comes back to that modeling to help convince them. But I agreed 100% that it's that reduction in support space is key to the success of the building.
Guys, we have about 20 minutes left, and I want to jump into this last topic because it has literally risen up and stolen bandwidth from about every other intelligent conversation in managing the facility portfolio, and that's this issue of net zero, decarbonization, electrification. I do want to leave about 10 minutes, so we keep this kind of short. If I could hear your strategies to deal with this, kind of start with you, Mitch.
Yeah. I think it's the same strategy we've been talking about in terms of compressing the footprint, right? Because before you start thinking about renewables and decarbonization and all of that investment, you got to make sure you have the tightest footprint that you have, so that you're not trying to put more renewables in place for space that's underutilized in the first place. But I think, ultimately, for our strategy is to use it as an overall sort of effort beyond green and decarbonization to drive down costs, right? Because we're tracking about 3 to 4% reduction in our energy use intensity every year. That's resulting in about $2 to $3 million savings off of a sort of about a $50 to $60 million a year utilities budget. That's real money for our system. That could be the difference between making margin or whatever. So the leadership has really bought into it, even though we don't have a climate action plan yet. And so for us, it's really about looking at every project as an opportunity to reduce our energy footprint. And then as we reduce our energy footprint, I talked about our ability to hedge from a utility standpoint, so we didn't get hit by a lot of these utilities costs here. As we hedging, we're looking at renewables, wind, solar. Right now, we're buying a lot of nuclear generated energy, which is carbon free, but it's not necessarily green. But as we do that, socializing our leadership, not only as to the opportunities to reduce costs, but to hedge against regulatory risks that we think are out there. So we think 4 or 5 years from now, Pennsylvania could come down and start to really sort of drive this in a way that may not be as productive for us. So we want to get ahead of that curve too. So it's about managing that risk as well as driving down costs.
Spend a little time in California, you can.
Right.
So you New York guys, New York kind of jumped up and codified a lot of this stuff politically, threw down the gauntlet.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, tell us how you're dealing with that with your system.
So your point, New York has said that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. The reality is, we've hesitated from signing on to a pledge stating that because it's not feasible at this point. Sure. We if you recognize so 85% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from natural gas burning. So for our chilled water and steam, our conversion to electrification, and we're fortunate that in Western New York in particular, we have the cleanest electrical grid in the country. And if I was in Illinois, I wouldn't be switching back to electrification where they're still burning coal. It doesn't make sense, but we have this big water feature called Niagara Falls that produces a lot of our electricity. So we have a very clean electrical grid. So when we could electrify, it does make sense, but the conversion in today's dollars would cost me $1.2 billion just to switch over my natural gas to electrification. So that's not going to happen quickly. So we've looked at where does it make sense, what projects could we do. We are looking at right now for the new bed tower we're putting in, we have to add cooling towers for that. We're looking to switch those to electrification. It's about an $18 million premium, but it does have a nice payback, not one that you would use for another project, but from a utility standpoint, we can get a payback on that. And then we're looking at things where it makes sense. So the Sears Adaptive Reuse Project, the nice thing about that building being one is we have a lot of roof space. So we were able to use a PPA with a third party. It didn't cost us anything. To the point about predictability being important, we're able to lock in for the next 20 years a cost for our electricity that's below what we pay today. It costs us nothing, and 25% of the power in our building will be solar coming off our rooftop, and we didn't invest any capital in that. So looking at where it makes sense strategically to do those types of projects.
So Jonathan, what's Northwell doing?
Well, I think we're scrambling, like everyone is. I mean, you know, New York City took it a step further than the state, and the mandate in New York City rolls out over 3 steps by 2034. That they want facilities to have a dramatic reduction in carbon, and they have set steps every 5 years that you have to achieve. And you know, it's really, when you think about hospitals and you think about the age of hospitals in New York City and the cost for us to achieve that is next to impossible. From the way we have to operate our tertiary hospitals and the requirements to actually achieve what the city is trying to tell us to do. So you know, we're looking at it from kind of 2 sides. We are battling it with the city right now. We are trying to find exceptions within their law for healthcare facilities. At the same time, we're trying to figure out how we can get close, because it's a fine-based model. And so now all of a sudden we're going to add on top to our normal expenses $1 million, $2 million fine on an annual basis for not meeting the law, just because we're trying to provide the care to the community. So we're kind of working it from 2 angles. But from a Northwell perspective, we're starting, I'll say we're starting small and trying to test things that we believe will work to get us there. One of this building that we're just starting construction on in the Upper East Side, where the goal is for this building when it opens to be compliant to the 2034 law from day one, and then we see how that works and how we think we can take any of those technologies and apply them into our hospitals in a retroactive perspective to try to get us closer, to try to reduce what that annual fine is. But it all kind of comes back to an ROI. In some cases, it's going to be cheaper to pay the fine, and you know, and it's unfortunate, but that's, you know, we're just in the New York City metro area. You know, I've got 6 hospitals that I would have to retrofit of somewhere around, you know, the 7 and 8 million square feet of space, and that all will be affected by this law. And how do I pick and choose? How do I, you know, if each hospital is going to cost me $75, $100 million to retrofit, how do I pick and choose over the next 5 years what I'm going to achieve and what I'm not? Because I also have, you know, 18 other hospitals out there that want capital. And I can't just say, sorry, you're not getting capital until 2034 because I got to meet local law 97 in the city. It just unfortunately doesn't work that way.
Travis, we have about 12 minutes left here. If you could, I love your perspective on this, and if you could share that with the group as well. I'd like to maybe have 8-10 minutes left, if we could, for questions from the group.
So my general sense, so we're, as a health system, all in with sustainability. You know, our CEO's been a co-chair of the America's All In program. We have a climate action plan, and my concern with where we sit today is that sustainability takes too much oxygen in the room. We have bigger issues. You know, we talked about them today. We have portfolio issues. We have, you know, clinician issues. We have labor force issues. We have supply chain issues, and those really have to be the dominant part of the conversation. And if we spend time consuming the discussion around how we're going to respond to something in 2034 or 2040, it becomes really difficult to solve today's problems. And so I think we've taken a pragmatic approach in saying, you know, we're just going to make simple decisions. So it becomes part of the decision criteria. If I'm going to lease space, that developer is going to be committed to that goal effectively. And I'll go choose another location. I'll pay a little bit more for that lease space in order to accommodate that. But I just don't have the energy to kind of negotiate with somebody over that. If we can't get that done, we'll develop it ourselves. We just make, here's the criteria, here's the decision, and we'll put a self-development, solution in place effectively. I have a daughter who's going off to college, so she's certainly very committed to the health and well-being of our planet Earth. She reminds me of that all the time. However, and the however is, it's a capital question. We simply don't have the capital that is necessary to achieve those objectives on our own. And we don't have an operating environment that's consistent, because we go from the Dakotas to Arkansas, from Arkansas to California, from California to the Pacific Northwest. There is no universal solution. And so you just set a smaller set of guidelines, you make some key decisions, and the hope is that as we come out of what is the worst 4 or 5 months financially in the healthcare industry, and we look back on that a year from now or 2 years from now, we're in a better or healthier financial position to make some different decisions effectively in relationship to these issues.
Can I just add one point? In addition to the capital, I think healthcare is unique in the fact that we have to also look at resiliency of our space. And one of the challenges we're facing is the more we move to electrification, the more we lose our redundancy, especially in our cooling. So right now we're spoiled that we have 100% redundancy in cooling because of the way we're set up with natural gas burning. But as we move to electrification, we cannot run those on generators. If we lose our commercial power, we lose our ability to cool all of our spaces the way we do today. So I think they have to recognize that they're giving up one when they take the other.
Yeah, I think the Navy figured out how to feed thousands of people on these large ships, but I have no idea how we would actually do it in healthcare. Electric kitchen is just a mind boggler to me. Let's open this up to the questions now. We've got a young lady in the back with a mic. So any questions you have for the panel, raise your hand. She'll bring you over a mic.
Thank you guys very much. Good discussion. So how does the move to remote work for your company's employees affecting your portfolios? What are you doing?
We were moving in that direction even ahead of COVID, right? Because the margins in particularly not-for-profit healthcare are just really, really tight. So, I spent a chunk of time doing that at Kaiser Permanente, sort of offloading administrative assets and consolidating and moving to sort of more open work plans, and was doing the same at Jefferson. And we'll continue down that pike. I think that the uncertainty is, before we were kind of doing it in a sort of a step-by-step way, and now with this full jump, it's like, how does that workforce need to actually engage? And that's the big question. And oh, by the way, that differs department by department. So you almost can't even come in and say, as a corporate policy, here is how the game's going to be played. So for us at Jefferson, I would say it's still kind of a work in progress figuring that part out.
We're data becomes our friend. So, right now, absolute best case, best day, we will see a 21% utilization of our corporate space. If I go back pre-COVID, absolute best day, just over 50%. And so the mindset that people need a cube, an office, a building to go to is just simply not, it's just not a valid concept. Convincing them of what the space needs to be is something very different than what they had before. So a physically different environment, because what we find is that they're simply coming together to collaborate, meet, build plans, and then they go back home or go somewhere else to work those plans. Our goal, we spend about $75 million a year on our corporate portfolio. Our goal is to reduce that to 20. We believe that will be a sufficient amount of space across the country for us to function as a health system and support the 11 to 12,000 corporate workforce that we have as an organization. But it will be, I might have 150 people who have permanent physical office space going forward.
So would you divest yourselves of those physical assets that were non-clinical, let's say?
I would love to sell them to you.
So I think, one of the challenges we're obviously trying to work through it like everybody else, and a lot of the hybrid seems to be one that everybody's comfortable with. But the challenge is when they want to work remote, everybody wants to work remote on Monday and on Friday. But then Tuesday, so then we still have to have the same peak space. So the key is spreading that utilization out and recognizing everybody can't take the same day to be in the office. We've got to rotate those through, otherwise we don't gain any efficiency.
Yeah, we have, as I noted, we've noted that the peak space is still 20%.
Yeah.
So, I think one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, that there's this is a long duration business. So, the cycle time for me to reduce that spend is 10 years. I have leases that extend, and in the commercial office environment today in Chicago, there's no possible way I got a landlord who's willing to allow me to buy out of that particular environment, and there's no sublease market for me to sublease that space. That's an 8-year commitment that, the hope is that we come out of this over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, and that market has improved in a way for us to exit that space. But if we're doing it, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is in the same boat. So the likelihood of us getting out of that in the short run, very, very small, in my opinion.
Let's go to the back of the room.
Yeah, hi guys, great discussion. I've been in the business of creating buildings my whole career and really come to appreciate the opportunity and the value that we can bring to our organizations in terms of changing that culture. Is that appreciated by the leadership teams in your organizations?
Yeah, for us, I think built environment helps set brand, so kind of underlying brand piece. Common spirit, no one knows that. We have Dignity Health, we have St. Joseph's, and so we use built environment as a way to stitch the system together. We use standardization as a way to create kind of operating philosophies. We use physical environment as a way to kind of set culture, when we're starting to bring folks together effectively. So those are all important factors in that kind of cultural underpinning. We as a health system are an infant. So you talk about huge legacies, long terms, but common spirit's 3 years old. So our culture is ill-defined, and the physical environment will help us in relationship to creating that more effectively and more efficiently and more quickly.
Yeah, I think the challenge still is that our missions are patient care, education, research, and it doesn't say and facilities, right? So all those things need to occur in a facility, and certainly one that's right-sized, but that's kind of this mindset change we're trying to deal with right now, senior leadership across the country. We've got to understand what that looks like.
And so one of my tasks at Jefferson was to bring a corporate real estate capability, and so we built that transformation around generally 5 pillars located around a 6th. The first is governance. How do we fit in? How do we align? How do we need to be organizationally structured to deliver to this new mission? Second one was process standardization, right? I think to Travis's point, that's what helps stitch disparate organizations sort of together. Mm-hmm. Then it's workforce development, because you're developing that new operating plan. You got to have the workforce, and you got to start hiring that workforce that's going to be able to operate that future plan, not today's plan. Digital transformation, so how are we going to leverage technology to offset and augment staffing? And then strategic sourcing. What is that mix of FTE versus contractor support? So I had an executive say, we don't want to outsource that anymore. We want to do it in-source. And I go, you do realize that in real estate, 90% of what we deliver is through some consultant or vendor support. So that education is not fully understood sometimes. But all of that's really difficult if you don't have those cultural changes, right? The culture change is what seeds acceptance of a lot of those. So it's a work in progress for us in the real estate, for the company as a whole, I think for the industry as a whole.
I think we're about out of time. I want to thank the panel. Your expertise is always just a complete wealth of knowledge, and great to hear what you guys are up to. And appreciate your willingness to join us this morning, and hope you have a great day. So thanks.